My grandfather slid a folded index card under the banquet table. My brother was busy smiling for campaign photos. His hand was shaking so badly, I barely recognized the handwriting. "Don't let them put me on stage alone." On the back, he had written one more thing: Bell Friday. By then, I had already been awake for almost 18 hours. My name is Tessa Whitcomb. I had worked a 12-hour shift at St. Agnes Hospice, changed out of my scrubs in the employee bathroom, and eaten half a granola bar in my car with the engine running. On the passenger seat beside me was my grandfather's oxygen tubing, a pill organizer, backup batteries for his hearing aids, compression socks, low-sodium crackers, and the little pulse oximeter he hated but always let me use. That was my life now. Not dramatic, not heroic. Just 1,000 small things nobody noticed until I missed one. The fundraiser was for my brother Caleb, who was running for county sheriff. My parents had been talking about it for weeks, like it was a coronation. Grandpa Earl, 84 years old, Vietnam veteran, stubborn as winter grass, was supposed to stand on stage and say a few words about Caleb's service to the family. I was there to make sure Grandpa made it through the evening safely. My mother met me near the entrance before I even got both feet inside. "Please, don't start with blood pressure numbers tonight," she whispered. "This is Caleb's night." Behind her, my father was already laughing with two men from the Veterans Committee. "Tessa's our family warrior," he told them. "She thinks every cough is a crisis." Then Caleb walked in 20 minutes late, wearing a pressed navy suit, and kissed Grandpa on the forehead just as the photographer lifted her camera. Everyone smiled. I stood outside the frame, holding the oxygen line. That was how my family liked me best, close enough to fix the problem, far enough not to be seen. Caleb glanced at my medical bag and smirked. "Here comes Black Viper with her emergency kit," he said. "Nobody needs a battlefield medic to teach an old man how to smile for 3 minutes." People laughed because they thought it was just family teasing. Grandpa didn't. He kept his hand closed around mine, like the room itself had become unsafe. "Now, let's begin the story. Now, 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 let's begin the story." I folded Grandpa's card and slipped it into my coat pocket before I could stare at it too long. That was another habit my family had trained into me. Notice the problem, but don't make a scene. Prepare for the worst, but don't explain why. Prevent the crisis, then accept that nobody will remember there had been one. So I stepped closer to Grandpa's chair and checked the oxygen line twisted near the metal leg. Denise Caro moved toward us with her clipboard tucked under one arm. She smiled like every instruction was a favor. "Let's get the family photo before Mr. Whitcomb gets too tired." She placed Caleb behind Grandpa's right shoulder, my father on the left, my mother close enough to look devoted. When I reached for the oxygen tubing, Denise lowered her voice. "Could we lose that for just one shot? Medical equipment makes people nervous." "He needs it," I said. Caleb glanced down at Grandpa. He was sitting upright and trying hard to look fine. My brother mistook stillness for strength. 30 seconds, Tess," he said, slipping the cannula from Grandpa's nose like he was fixing a crooked tie. "We can all survive half a minute without turning this into a hospital." The camera flashed twice. I stood outside the frame, holding the oxygen line like evidence nobody wanted, admitted. The second the photographer lowered her camera, I put the cannula back. Grandpa took one slow breath, then another, and his fingers loosened around the armrest. A few minutes later, Denise tapped the microphone and thanked everyone for coming. She praised Caleb's service, his leadership, his dedication to the county. Then she said, "Lieutenant Caleb Whitcomb has spent the last year balancing public service with caring for his grandfather through a difficult season." The room applauded. My father clapped first. My mother put a hand over her heart. Caleb lowered his eyes in that humble way politicians practice in mirrors. Grandpa turned his head, searching for me. I was beside the trash can, sorting his evening pills into my palm. The lights near our table were too dim to read the labels. In February, Grandpa fell at 1:43 inches the morning. I slept on his carpet for 3 nights. Caleb sent flowers. My mother called that showing up. My cousin Mara stood by the check-in table, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. She had seen the oxygen come off. She had seen me put it back. But Mara worked part-time for Denise now, and in our family, silence was often mistaken for loyalty. Then I noticed Denise's clipboard lying open on the registration table. Under the schedule, one line had been circled twice. Earl remarks at 8:15, no medical interruption. I read it once, then again. Not keep him comfortable, not check with Tessa. No medical interruption. As if the problem wasn't that Grandpa might struggle on stage, but that someone might notice. I turned to my mother and asked who approved him speaking at 8:15. She didn't look at the clipboard. She just smoothed the front of her dress and said, "We already handled it as a family." And in my family, that usually meant after they had decided I would carry the consequences. I looked at my mother long enough for her to know I understood. In our family, we handled it, usually meant everyone had talked except the person who would deal with the fallout. "I don't want him speaking tonight," I said, keeping my voice low. Not from a script he didn't write. Not after somebody took his oxygen off for a photograph. If Caleb wants a family statement, he can read one himself. My father's smile disappeared first. "Your grandfather served in a war," he said. "He can handle 3 minutes at a podium." Caleb stepped closer, still wearing that soft campaign smile. "You always do this, Tess. You turn care into control." The words landed because they were familiar. If I asked whether Grandpa had eaten before his diuretic, I was hovering, but when something went wrong, my phone was always the first one that rang. "I'm not controlling him," I said. "I'm listening to him." My mother folded her arms. "Then listen to us for once. Caleb has worked hard for tonight. He has donors here, veterans, people who believe in him. Why does your concern always have to become the center of the room?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because I was standing beside a man whose oxygen they had removed for a cleaner photograph, and somehow I had become the disruption. Before I could answer, Caleb walked toward the stage. Denise gave him a small warning look. He was already moving. He took the microphone and gave the room an easy grin. "Before we get to Grandpa Earl later tonight," he said, "I should warn you all. My sister Tessa may require a full medical clearance before he says hello." A wave of laughter moved through the hall, comfortable and social, the kind that makes cruelty sound harmless. A woman at the next table gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind that said "poor thing" without asking what happened. Caleb looked right at me. "She loves him," he added. "She just forgets the rest of us do too." That was the part that hurt. Not the joke. The accusation underneath it felt sharp. That my care was selfish, my vigilance vanity. That I'd turned love into a competition I was trying to win. Grandpa lowered his eyes to the table. His hand moved toward mine, then stopped, as if even reaching for me might make things worse. I stood there with the folded card pressing against my coat pocket. "Don't let them put me on stage alone. Bell Friday." Across the room, Denise was already handing Grandpa a printed sheet I had never seen before, and Caleb was still smiling like he had solved the problem. Denise handed the paper to Grandpa with both hands, as if she were offering him something precious, rather than something he'd never asked for. He adjusted his glasses and stared at the first line too long. I knew that look. The words were clear enough to read, but they didn't feel like his. His thumb moved along the edge of the page, searching for some sign that it belonged to him. I stepped closer. "Grandpa, did you write that?" His eyes flicked to mine, then toward Caleb, then down again. That tiny hesitation said more than an answer ever could. Caleb gave a soft laugh for the people nearby. "Tess, it's remarks, not a sworn statement," Denise added. "We just helped polish his thoughts. Nobody expects an 84-year-old man to write campaign language on his own." I took the paper gently from Grandpa's hand. The first paragraph thanked the Veterans Committee. The second praised Caleb's service to the county. Then, I saw the sentence that made the room seem to tilt under my feet. "Caleb carried this family through my decline when I became too weak to lead it myself." I read it twice, hoping the words would rearrange into something less cruel. They didn't. A year of my life sat inside that sentence, stolen and dressed in my brother's name. The nights I slept in Grandpa's recliner, because he was afraid of the hallway after dark. The mornings I drove over before work to check whether his ankles were swelling. The afternoon I sat on hold with the VA while Caleb texted, "Can you handle Grandpa today? I've got donor calls." Apparently, it became leadership when it belonged to him. "Who wrote this?" I asked. Denise's smile held, but only barely. "The family reviewed it." That word again. Family. In our house, it had a strange way of meaning whoever agreed before I entered the room. I looked at my mother. She kept smoothing a crease in her sleeve that wasn't there. My father cleared his throat and said, "It's just a speech, Tessa. Don't dissect it." Grandpa's voice came small from the chair. "That doesn't sound like me." For 1 second, I thought that would be enough, but Janelle leaned down and touched his shoulder. "Daddy, you get nervous reading in public. We're just making it easier." Her voice was sweet. Too sweet. That sweetness people use when they're about to take something away and call it help. My cousin Mara appeared beside me with a stack of name tags in her hand. "Tess," she whispered. "I thought you knew." I turned toward her. "Knew what?" She swallowed. "Your parents said you were okay with Caleb being listed as Grandpa's primary family support. For the profile, maybe the veteran family grant thing." Denise said it was approved. Her voice dropped. "They told me not to bother you because you'd make it complicated." Behind my mother, Caleb looked past me and gave Denise the smallest nod. One of his volunteers moved toward Grandpa's chair while Mara was still trying to explain the packets. Then Grandpa looked toward the empty space beside his walker and asked, "Where's my green binder?" My mother answered too quickly. "You don't need that tonight, Daddy." Grandpa frowned, confused but not lost. "I wrote things down," he said, "so nobody could say I forgot." No one moved. Not Caleb, not my father, not Denise. And in that silence, I felt the first real crack open under the evening. This was not just a speech I hadn't seen, or a picture taken without oxygen tubing. Somewhere in that room, my grandfather's own words had been removed before he could use them. I turned back to ask him where he had last seen the binder. But his chair was empty. I cut down the hallway before anyone could smooth the empty chair into something harmless. Grandpa's water glass was still on the table. His napkin was still folded beside it. The oxygen line trailed over the armrest. It looked like somebody had forgotten it was attached to a man, not the furniture. At the end of the hall, a side room door stood half open, and Caleb's voice came through it, low and patient. "Try it again, Grandpa. Just that one sentence." I stopped outside the door. Grandpa sat under a buzzing fluorescent light, with the speech trembling in both hands. Denise stood beside him with her clipboard, and Caleb crouched in front of him like a coach before a game. One volunteer lingered near the wall with a phone angled toward them. They weren't recording yet, just practicing how the moment would look. Grandpa read slowly. "My grandchildren helped me through a hard year," Caleb interrupted without raising his voice. "No, not grandchildren, Caleb. It needs to be personal," Grandpa blinked. "But Tessa does the pills." Caleb's smile stayed in place, but his eyes hardened. "That's not what tonight is about." The sentence was quiet, almost casual. That was why it hurt. For once, my brother had told the truth. I stepped into the room. Denise turned first, her smile snapping into place. "Tessa, we're just helping him feel comfortable with the remarks." I looked at Grandpa, sitting there without his binder, trying to remember which version of his own life would keep everyone from getting upset. "He doesn't sound comfortable," I said. Caleb stood. "You need to stop barging into every room like you're the only person who cares." Grandpa looked down, embarrassed, and that made me angrier than anything Caleb had said. They had managed to make an old man feel guilty for telling the truth about who helped him. A second copy of the speech lay on the folding table beside Denise's clipboard. I picked it up and saw blue notes written in the margins. "Pause here. Look at Caleb. Smile after service." Then I turned the page over and saw the logo at the bottom. County Veterans Family Service Grant. Under it was one typed line. Public caregiver narrative required for community profile. There it was. Not hidden, exactly. Just placed where nobody expected the unpaid daughter with the medical bag to look. A clean story. A decorated grandfather. A police lieutenant's son. And me somewhere outside the frame, useful only as long as I stayed unnamed. I looked at Caleb. Is this for your campaign, or for the grant? His jaw tightened. It's for the family. No, I said. It's for the version of the family that makes you look like the man you keep telling people you are. Denise stepped between us slightly, not enough to seem aggressive, just enough to manage the room. This is a community profile, Tessa, not a nursing chart. Grandpa's voice came from behind her, thin but clear. I don't want to say it wrong. For the first time all night, Caleb looked scared, not worried about Grandpa. Scared of what Grandpa might say if nobody handed him the right words. I folded the speech and held it at my side. Then he doesn't read words, he doesn't understand. Caleb took one slow breath. You don't understand what's writing on this. I looked at Grandpa under that ugly light. No, I said. I think I'm finally starting to. The rest of that night didn't blow up the way folks expect the truth to. It tightened. Caleb took Grandpa back into the main room with one hand on his shoulder and a warning in his eyes. Denise kept smiling at donors. My mother told me we would talk tomorrow. She meant the evening to end before anyone important noticed the crack. I drove home after midnight with Grandpa's folded card in my coat pocket and the grant line still burning behind my eyes. The next morning, I went to Grandpa's house like I always did. Saturday meant weight check, pill box refill, blood pressure log. And the breakfast, he pretended not to need help making. I carried coffee in one hand and his pharmacy bag in the other. But when I punched in the door code, the lock blinked red. I tried again. Red. I stood on the porch in the cold morning light, looking at a door that had never kept me out before. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. We changed the code. Giving you a break. Mara has him this morning. For a moment, I felt something inside me go very still. People who say they want to give you a break don't lock you out without a word. They don't put an 84-year-old man with heart failure behind a new code and call that kindness. I called Mara. She answered on the third ring, whispering, Tess, I don't know where his morning pills are. In the background, Grandpa was asking for his blue mug. They told me to just sit with him for 2 hours, she said. Your mom said it was all set. I closed my eyes. Another clean phrase laid over a mess they expected me to fix later. Before I could tell Mara which cabinet held the medication list, another call came through from a number I didn't know. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the Lancaster VA extension and answered. The woman on the line introduced herself as Paula Renshaw, Family Services Coordinator. Her voice was calm, professional, the kind that made bad news sound organized. I'm calling to confirm Monday's intake and the in-person care discussion Mr. Whitcomb requested for tonight. I gripped the porch railing. I'm sorry. What care discussion? There was a brief, careful pause. The caregiver update, Paula said. Our latest file lists Lieutenant Caleb Whitcomb as primary family caregiver and you only as occasional medical assistance. The cold air moved through my coat like water. Occasional, medical, assistance. 14 months of alarms, falls, pill schedules, grocery runs, and sleeping with my phone against my chest had been reduced to 3 polite words. That was when the truth changed shape. They had not forgotten me. They had erased me. Not in anger, not by accident, but neatly, in a file that could be printed and handed to strangers. Paula continued. Mr. Whitcomb asked that Major Adrian Bell be present tonight. He said he was concerned his words were being cleaned up. I took Grandpa's card from my pocket and looked at the back again. Bell Friday. This time, the handwriting did not look confused. It looked like proof. I finally walked back to my car and sat there with the pharmacy bag on my lap. The porch was too exposed, too familiar, too close to a door I used to open without thinking. I called Paula back first and asked her to email the current caregiver file, the intake notice, and the exact time for tonight's care discussion. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. If my family was going to turn care into paperwork, paperwork was where I'd meet them. Then I called Grandpa's clinic and requested his updated medication list be sent to Paula directly. No screenshots, no rumors, no shouting across a kitchen. Just records with names, dates, and consequences. After that, I called Mara again. "Tell me only what you saw," I said. "Not what Mom explained. Not what Caleb said it meant. Just what you saw." She went quiet long enough for me to hear Grandpa asking for his blue mug in the background. Mara finally said that the night before, after I confronted them about the speech, my mother had taken Grandpa's green binder out of the walker pouch and put it in the trunk of her car. Janelle had whispered, "He gets agitated when he reads old things." I asked Mara if she was sure. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a blurry photo taken the night before in the VFW parking lot. I enlarged the picture with 2 fingers. There was the green binder on top of a cardboard box in my mother's open trunk. Beside it sat a white envelope with printed letters across the front. Monday. Intake Maple Ridge Memory Residence. For a while, I could not move. I was not against help or memory care or hard decisions made honestly. But this was different. This was a speech on Friday, a video for Caleb, and then an intake on Monday, before Grandpa could use the words he had written down to protect himself. My phone buzzed again. "Caleb, don't come tonight. Grandpa needs calm, and you're not calm." I read it twice. There it was, the oldest trick in our family. Take away my place, then call my reaction proof that I never deserved one. I looked at the locked house, the pharmacy bag in my lap, and Grandpa's card in my pocket. Then I typed back only one sentence. "I'll be where Grandpa asked me to be." I did not answer Caleb after that. Some messages are traps with punctuation. I sat in my car until my breathing slowed, then drove back to Grandpa's house, where my parents had apparently decided to hold their peace talk. Paula's email was open on my phone. The clinic list was saved in a folder Caleb could not rename. By the time I arrived, my father was waiting on the porch like a man who had rehearsed being reasonable. "Maybe we all got heated," Roy said. "Your mother wants to talk. No one's trying to cut you out." He said it gently, which almost made it worse. Inside, Janelle had coffee ready, the good mugs, and the lemon cookies she bought when she wanted a conversation to look civilized. Caleb sat at the table in shirt sleeves, hands folded, face arranged into careful concern. "I never meant to take credit," he said. "Denise used campaign language, that's all." My mother nodded too quickly. "We should have included you more, sweetheart. More." As if I had missed a meeting, not been removed from a file, Roy touched the back of a chair. "Let's postpone the big decisions until everyone calms down." For one tired minute, I wanted to believe them. I wanted a family that could correct itself before someone got hurt. Then I asked to see Grandpa. The room changed so slightly someone else might have missed it. Caleb looked at my mother. My mother looked at her coffee. Roy said, "He's resting." I stood, "Then I'll sit with him while he rests." Janelle reached for my wrist, not hard, but fast. "Tessa, don't wake him. He had a difficult morning." The old part of me almost obeyed. The steady one, the daughter trained to make everyone else feel less guilty. My phone rang before I could move past her. The caller ID showed a number I did not know. An older woman's voice said, "Is this Tessa Whitcomb? This is Ruth Albright from next door." My stomach dropped before she finished. "Your grandfather is in my kitchen. He came over in slippers. No coat. He says they took his shoes because he kept asking for his binder." The kitchen went silent. Not shocked, silent. Caught silent. Caleb stood so quickly, his chair scraped the floor. "That's not what happened." My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Her eyes were already wet in the way that had saved her from answers for most of my life. Roy whispered, "For God's sake, Janelle." And there it was, not confusion, not misunderstanding, but knowledge breaking through the performance too late. I drove the half block to Mrs. Albright's with my hands locked around the steering wheel. Grandpa sat at her kitchen table wearing plaid slippers and one of her late husband's cardigans. He looked smaller than he had at the VFW, but his eyes cleared when he saw me. "Tess," he said. I knelt beside him. His hands were cold. "They said if I had my shoes, I'd wander," he whispered. But I wasn't wandering. I was looking for what I wrote. Mrs. Albright stood by the sink, pretending not to listen while hearing every word. "He knocked on my back door," she said softly. "Said he needed to call the granddaughter who still asked questions." I looked at Grandpa. For the first time that day, he didn't seem confused at all. He seemed afraid of being called confused before he could finish a sentence. He reached for my hand, the same way he had under the banquet table. "The officer is coming for me," he said, "not for Caleb." Grandpa kept my hand in both of his, as if I might disappear if he loosened his grip. Mrs. Albright set a glass of water near him and stepped back without asking questions. That small mercy nearly broke me. After a morning of people explaining him, managing him, correcting him, someone had finally acted like his words were his own. I pulled a chair close and said, "Tell me what you want me to know." He looked toward the window, where Grandpa's house sat half a block away with my parents' cars in the drive. "I wrote to the Veterans Service Office 2 weeks ago," he said. "Not because I don't need help. I know I need help." His voice caught on the admission, but he forced it steady. "I just wanted somebody outside the family to ask me before they moved me somewhere." Then he tapped his chest with 2 fingers. "I'm still in here, Tess." I swallowed hard. I know. But the shame hit me anyway. I had spent so long fighting for his safety that sometimes I forgot to ask what safety meant to him. I asked if he wanted me to take him to the hospital, or to Paula, or away from the house altogether. He shook his head slowly. "If I hide, they'll say I got confused. If I don't show up, they'll say I changed my mind." Then he told me what was in the green binder. Not secrets, not accusations. Just the plain record of a life other people had started editing. His medication schedule, his fall notes, the days I stayed overnight, the calls he made to the VA, the page where he had written, "Tessa is not controlling me. She is the only one who still asks." I turned my face for a second. Some sentences you can't survive while looking at the person who wrote them. My phone rang again. Paula. I put her on speaker so Grandpa could hear. She confirmed Major Adrian Bell would be at the VFW that evening for the care discussion Earl had requested. My family had already told the office Grandpa would be there for the event. "Mr. Whitcomb," Paula said gently, "do you still want that conversation documented tonight?" Grandpa sat straighter in Mrs. Albright's chair. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Before they make me smaller on paper." That was the second truth of the week yet. Major Bell was not coming to honor Caleb, endorse Caleb, or decorate Caleb's campaign. He was coming because my grandfather, in the middle of being polished into a symbol, had found one official door my family had not thought to close. I looked at Grandpa's slippers, his cold hands, the cardigan that wasn't his. I understood what he was asking of me. Not rescue. Witness. I helped him into his coat. "Then tonight," I said, "you don't go on that stage alone." By the time we returned to the VFW, the room had been dressed for a different story. The flag stood behind the podium. Caleb's campaign sign had been centered under the lights. Denise was testing the microphone, while a volunteer checked the phone on a tripod. My mother stood beside the stage, smoothing Grandpa's empty chair, as if smoothing the fabric could make it right. When she saw him walk in with me, her face changed before she could arrange it back into concern. Caleb crossed the room fast. "You had no right to bring him here like this." Grandpa stopped beside me, one hand on my arm, the other tucked inside his coat pocket. "I asked her to," he said. His voice was thin, but it carried farther than I expected. Denise stepped forward with that polished smile. "Mr. Whitcomb, why don't we get you seated and comfortable before anything gets confusing?" Grandpa looked at her for a long second. Confusing? For who? That was when Mara came through the side door, carrying the green binder against her chest. I had not known she would get it. Later, she told me she took it from my mother's trunk while everyone was arguing in the kitchen. In that moment, All I saw was my cousin's face, pale but decided. My mother whispered, "Mara, don't." Mara did not stop. She placed the binder in Grandpa's hands, like she was returning something sacred. Caleb reached for the microphone first. Grandpa reached it before him. The room quieted in pieces. Forks stopped against plates. Chairs turned. Someone near the veterans' table said, "Let the man speak." Grandpa held the microphone with both hands. "I was told I'd say Caleb carried this family," he began. My father closed his eyes. "That isn't true." Caleb stepped toward him. "Grandpa, you're tired." Grandpa nodded once. "I am tired. That's why I wrote it down." Mara opened the binder to a tab marked Notes for Review. Grandpa read slowly, each line costing him something. February 11th. Tessa slept on the floor because I was afraid after the fall. March 3rd. Caleb sent flowers. Tessa changed my bandage. June 19th. Tessa paid for walker breaks. My mother began to cry softly. "Daddy, you were confused." Grandpa lifted his eyes. "Not about that." The sentence landed harder than any shout could have. Then the front doors opened, and a tall man in a dark jacket stepped inside with Paula beside him. He took in the podium, the phone on the tripod, the binder, and Grandpa's shaking hands. Then his eyes moved to me. He stopped so suddenly that Paula nearly bumped into his shoulder. His posture changed. Not dramatically, precisely, like a memory had entered the room before he did. He straightened and said, "Staff Sergeant Whitcomb, Black Viper." No one laughed that time. Caleb's face lost color. My mother looked from him to me, as if the woman with the pharmacy bag had become someone she did not know how to dismiss. Major Adrian Bell stepped closer, his voice calm enough to make everyone else sound guilty. "Before anyone records another word from this man," he said, "we're going to ask what Earl Whitcomb wants without someone feeding him a script." Grandpa's grip tightened around the binder, and for the first time all night, nobody reached to take it from him. Major Bell did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room had already changed shape around him. He asked Denise to stop the recording setup, then turned to Paula and said, "This is now a documented care plan discussion at Mr. Whitcomb's request." Denise opened her mouth, but Belle looked at the phone on the tripod and then back at her. "No campaign footage until we establish consent." The volunteer lowered the device like it had suddenly become heavy. Caleb recovered first. "Men like my brother often do." "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. Nobody was forcing Grandpa to say anything. Denise simplified the language. Mara stood beside the table with her hands shaking and said, "No, Caleb. You let them say it because it made you look good." He stared at her as if betrayal felt different coming from someone he'd thought would stay quiet. Paula opened the file on her tablet and asked Caleb to confirm his role as primary caregiver. For the first time that weekend, his title sounded less like honor and more like work. Belle said, "You don't get to be primary caregiver in print and unavailable in practice." A veteran donor at the front table quietly told Denise his pledged check would go to respite care instead of the campaign profile. Denise's face tightened, but she nodded and deleted the draft endorsement while everyone watched. My mother tried to cry her way back into kindness. "I was only trying to keep Daddy from feeling like a burden." Grandpa looked at her, tired and terribly clear. "You made me useful until I became inconvenient." Roy sat down as if his knees had finally understood what his pride would not. When he muttered that Maple Ridge would have been easier, Grandpa asked, "Easier for who?" No one answered, because the honest answer had always been, everyone except him. By the end of that meeting, Monday's intake was postponed until an independent assessment could be completed. The caregiver file would be corrected. Caleb had to attend physical therapy with Grandpa on Tuesday morning if his name stayed anywhere near the support plan. Roy took the cardiology appointment and grocery schedule. Janelle would bring the binder back and review the pill box with the clinic list instead of leaving it to memory and guilt. Then Belle looked at me. "And you," he said, not unkindly, "need your limits in writing too." I wanted to say I had no limits because Grandpa needed me, But the lie tasted old before it left my mouth. I thought love counted more, if nobody had to ask for it. Bell shook his head slightly, as if he had heard that kind of silence before. Labor needs witnesses too. 3 days later, a new care schedule appeared on Grandpa's refrigerator, and for the first Tuesday in 14 months, my name was not on it. 3 weeks later, the first thing I noticed was not the silence in Grandpa's kitchen. It was the refrigerator. A white calendar hung beside his cardiology magnet, filled with names that were not only mine. Caleb had Tuesday physical therapy. Roy had groceries and bills. Janelle had Sunday pillbox checks with the clinic list beside her. Mara had Thursday dinner. A paid respite aid came twice a week. My name appeared on Monday and Friday, small and ordinary, like a responsibility instead of a sentence. Caleb was in the living room, struggling to fold Grandpa's walker into the back of his SUV. He had already missed one campaign breakfast and moved a radio interview to make the appointment. He looked irritated, tired, and embarrassed by how hard the simple things were. Grandpa watched from his chair and said, "Now you know why your sister was always worn out." Caleb did not defend himself. He just tried the latch again, slower this time. Later, Caleb found me on the porch. "I thought if people knew how much you did," he said, "they'd know how little I did." It was the first honest thing he had offered without being cornered. I looked at the yard, at the same maple tree I used to sit under when I was 16, and thought being strong would make people love me better. "You let me disappear so you could look present," I said. He swallowed. "I know." I nodded toward Grandpa's walker. "Knowing is not fixing. Tuesday mornings are yours for 90 days. Start there." My mother apologized, but she did it carefully, like someone learning a language late in life. "I told myself you were better at this," she said. I thought that made it reasonable. I was washing Grandpa's blue mug, the one Mara finally knew to set out before breakfast. I dried my hands before answering. Being better at something doesn't mean it belongs to me alone. Yanela cried. But this time, she did not ask me to make her crying easier. Roy gave me a photograph from that night at the VFW, not Denise's polished photo. In it, Grandpa sat with the green binder open, Major Bell stood near the door, and I was behind Grandpa's chair with one hand on his shoulder. Roy said, "I used to think you made everything harder." I waited. He looked at the picture. "Now I think you were the only one saying which parts were already hard." I did not forgive them all at once. That only happens in stories people tell when they want the ending to clean up the middle. What changed was small and useful. My phone stopped being the first answer to every problem. Grandpa's voice stayed in his own paperwork. Caleb stopped using him as proof of a character he hadn't actually practiced, and I stopped believing love only counted when it cost me everything. They used to laugh when they called me Black Viper, like I was just a woman with a medical bag who worried too much. But what I took back that night was not a call sign. It was the right to stop being the invisible caregiver in my own family. Life does not always break us through one terrible betrayal. Sometimes it wears us down through small expectations that no one questions. One favor becomes a habit. One habit becomes a role. One role becomes a cage. And because we love the people inside that cage with us, we tell ourselves it is noble to stay quiet. But love was never meant to make one person disappear. Tessa's story reminds us that being strong does not mean being endlessly available. Being responsible does not mean accepting every burden that others refuse to carry. And being the person who knows what to do in a crisis should not turn into a lifetime assignment where everyone else gets to step back, praise your strength, and call it family. Sometimes the deepest wounds in a family are not made by hatred, they are made by convenience. By people who say, "You're better at this," when what they really mean is, "I don't want to do my part." By people who call you dramatic because your honesty threatens the version of themselves they prefer to believe. By people who mistake your silence for agreement, when really, it was exhaustion. The hardest lesson is that love needs boundaries if it is going to survive. Without boundaries, love can become unpaid labor. It can become resentment. It can become a quiet place where one person gives and gives until no one remembers she was ever supposed to have a life of her own. Tessa did not win because someone finally called her Black Viper. She won because she stopped letting her family use her strength as an excuse to ignore her humanity. She helped her grandfather keep his voice, and in doing that, she found her own again. Maybe some of us have been the steady one for too long. The one who answers every call. The one who fixes things quietly. The one who gets blamed for noticing what everyone else wants hidden. But being steady does not mean standing alone. And love that is real will not only accept your sacrifice, it will notice when you are tired, step closer, and carry part of the weight. Have you ever been treated like the strong one until your pain became invisible?